Hi, welcome back to the McCall's Quilting Quilt-Along. This is the Parisian Grace Quilt-Along, making this beautiful quilt. And I'm Laura Roberts. I'm so glad you joined me today because we get to play with these gorgeous fabrics again and play with the machine. And I'm going to show you how we make the C blocks. So remember when I showed you last time how to make a pieced square by sewing on either side of your drawn line, and then you cut it apart like this, like that. And when you press it open, you have this, the piece square, which is also known as a half square triangle. I'm not quite sure why. And here's a tip. When you're pressing, if you want to press to the dark side, go to the dark side, the best way to do that is to just put the dark side on top. If you have that dark side on top, and when you press it open, you'll be pressing the seam allowance to the dark side. That easy. Okay. So then I'm here. I'm going to show you something I tried to show you once before, but it was really hard. Well, now I have the perfect example. Okay. When I press this, I didn't press it open as well as I should have. And if you look really closely, you'll see that when I want to cut off these little dog ears here, I should be cutting right where that thread meets the edge of the fabric, like that. If I can see that stitching, if the thread tail here does not line up with that fold, it means I didn't press it open enough. Okay, so that's how you know when you go to cut off those dog ears, check it right there. So I'm going to repress that, and I might just add a little starch this time. Okay, and now when I press open, I'm going to make really sure I've got those corners all the way open, like that. Okay? All right, there we go. Let's take another look. See if I got that this time. There we go. Now if you'll look here, I'm just going to move that so you can see it really well. Right there, do you see how the thread is coming right out of the fold? And you can't see any stitching? That means I did it right this time. Now, it's no biggie to go back and repress. It can be a biggie if you don't go back and repress, because then when you're sewing these together, it's not going to be the right size, and your edge is going to be, instead of being a squared edge or a straight edge, you're going to have this wonky thing that will make you really sad. Okay, so now I have my little half square triangle sewn, and what's going to happen, I'm going to sew this together, these guys together like this. You see that one is going to go with that. You see those? This was one that I just sewed one square to another square to make my little segment there. And when I sew these together, I have this unit. Ta-da! That is it's one of the corner units. And the corner units come in two colors. They're pieced exactly the same way, it's just with two different colors of fabric. So this one has the rust print, and this one has that brown floral, both of course playing with the cream dot. So that's what you're going to be doing. You're going to be making these. That's the first thing. I'm going to put these over here in their spots, like that. Okay, the next thing that you're going to be doing, you're going to be making units like this. Okay, these are the side units. To make a side unit, first you're going to make a flying goose or a pieced rectangle, and then you're going to sew it to a little strip you made with two squares. Now, here's something you need to watch for. When you're doing your flying geese in this block, they're not oriented all the same way. And by that I mean that when you're sewing your squares on, and here are my squares that I've drawn my lines on, when you're sewing those squares on like that, for one flying goose, this kind here, you'll be sewing the brown on that side and the rust on that side. But for a different kind, which are the ones that we use on the side, okay, you see, that's not the same. The rust is on the opposite side. So on that one, when you're piecing that one, you're going to be sewing the brown to this side and the rust to that one. Now I'll show you what that looks like. Okay, one way you can do this that's really helpful so you get it straight. Remember I talked about chain piecing last time? If you're chain piecing something like this, and you know you need to make 4 of them for the 2 blocks, you're making 4 of one kind and 4 of the other to cover the 2 blocks. What you can do is piece the 4 of these. You're going to sew that brown square on 4 times. Just run them all through. And after you've done 4, you know you need to change. And then you'll put the rust square on that position and sew 4 of them. Okay? So I'm just going to sew one so I can show you what I'm talking about. There we go. I'll move this guy out of the way so you can see. Okay, over to the FOF. I was sewing this weekend and wishing I had this machine at home. I think I might need a new machine. You do kind of wear them out after a time. Of course, it probably just needs a tune-up, so that's probably what I do. Alrighty, I'm just going to do the same thing I did before and line up that line with my quarter-inch foot. I'm just going to go right down the edge like that. Okay, and so right like that, come right off, and then I made a mistake. Did you see what I did? I have sewn here, not on the line. I should be sewing on the line for a flying goose. Instead, I've sewn that quarter-inch like you would with a pieced square. So I'm going to show you my favorite way to rip out or to unsew. And let me just this is your plain old ordinary roller that picks up lint and stuff. And this is a little rotary cutter. This is the small size, that 22 millimeter size. And what I'm going to do, I open it and I'm going to hold it like a pencil. And I'm just going to lift the patch that I sewed on the wrong way like that, and I'm going to run that blade right along the thread. And all I'm doing is catching the thread like that with the blade. Was that fast? And then I'm going to use this to pull the extra threads out. I do it on both sides, and look, the threads are gone. You see that? So I'm going to do the same one on this piece, same thing. Just roll that over like that. And the only place the threads are not gone is right here where I sewed beyond the patch. So that's just a matter of using a pair of scissors and snipping. I don't even snip, I just kind of run them through and pull them out. All right? So that's my favorite way to unsew. A little rotary cutter and a thread picker upper roller thingy. Okay, so now I can go back. I can still use this patch. There's nothing wrong with it. Go back to the machine, and this time I'm going to sew on the line. Now, I made a mistake. I had to go and unsew it. So it's really easy when I come back now to make another mistake and put that square on the wrong side. So I'm just going to double check and look and make sure I'm sewing this properly by looking either at the picture that you're going to have, the diagram or the photo, and I'm going to make sure I have these right, which I do. So same thing as I did before. I'm just going to line that the way it's supposed to be. Okay, and this time I'm sewing on the line. Up, get my little thread catcher. I love these things. There we go. If you're having a real hard time with your thread kind of disappearing down into the machine, or sometimes you start sewing, especially on a corner, and the whole thing disappears in the machine, one of the best ways to take care of that is to buy yourself a single hole plate, a throat plate. Now, if you have an older machine like I do, I have a different kind of a throat plate, and it has the opening that you would use when you're zigzagging. So it's got that wide opening. It's more of a like a rectangle or sort of a wide slit, and it's easier for fabric to go down there. So if you're really having a problem with this, go ahead and go to your dealer and get yourself a single hole throat plate. But I'm not going to have that problem here, so I'm just going to sew down get my pencil line, whoops, right down the middle, like that. Oh, I think that's going to be a whole lot better. There we go. I'm just going to snip that off. There you go, and you see, I've sewn right down on that line, just the way I'm supposed to. So I'm going to cut off that extra fabric, like that. And you can hang on to these little triangles, oops, hang on to the triangles as you get them, because they can be little thread holders too. And I'm going to run over here and I'm going to press this open, like this. If you want to use a little spray starch, you certainly can, or starch alternative. And remember, you want to set that seam. So that's what I'm doing. I'm setting the seam like that. There we go. And then I'm just going to press it open. Okay. It helps if you really want to get those things pressed open on those corners like I showed you last time. It helps if you just use your finger to just kind of start that little turnaround. All right. There we go. That one's done. Now I'm going to sew the other one. Again, I'm going to kind of look. Who am I trying to match? Okay, I'm trying to match that guy, so I need to put my rest square here. Now there we go. Put the rest square over there and back to the machine. Okay. So I'm going to grab this extra triangle I cut off. I'm going to make sure that the thread is through the foot, like that. I'm just going to sew along to get that through. Now, same thing. I can sew from the corner to the corner, from the corner starting at the corner and in. Or, if you're having a problem with that going down, you can turn it around and you can start sewing up here. You could do that on the other one as well, the first one. You can always start sewing up here. You don't have to start on the corner. I'm going to show you what that looks like. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to bring that presser foot up a little bit so I can get that all the way underneath there, that little leading edge. And I'm just going to do the same thing. I'm going to sew on that line, just like that. All right. And get my scissors and snip that off. And I'm just going to cut like I did before. Cut away that seam allowance, that extra. Okay, let's go press it open. All right, a little spritz. You know why I'm spritzing these with starch? Well, I'm at this point. Once I've cut this, once you've sewn it and you've trimmed it, that's a bias edge. And those bias edges stretch and deform and do all kinds of weird stuff. So I'm going to press, right now I'm going to set the seam. And when I do that, the starch will get it stiff. When it's stiff, it's much less likely to stretch, so it's less likely to get wonky. Wonky being the technical term. Okay, let's just press this guy open, like that. And ta-da, there's that piece, all ready to go. So I need to sew these two together. I would need to sew these two together to put those into that. But before I do that, I'm going to show you this one, just one more time to refresh your memory. If I sew these in the opposite orientation, so rust is over here and the brown is over here, I'm going to get the right flying goose for the side units, okay? Now, just keep that in your head, get those out of the way, and I'm going to sew these two together so I can finish making that unit. All right. It's pretty easy, isn't it, to sew two squares together? I'm going to show you something that you don't want to do, all right? When I'm aligning these guys, do you see what would happen? If I'm not really careful, I can have this going on right here. Do you see that? Where it's not really aligned, look at that. Okay, now one way to make sure you're not doing that is when you're aligning them, align the opposite corners right with corners. So if I know that I've got this first corner correct, and then I look down here and that's not aligned, that's like, oops. Okay, so you just kind of work that up like that until you have them aligned. You really shouldn't be able to see the square underneath when you've got them just the way they're supposed to be. All right? So when I'm sewing these together, this is in fact the 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I don't have a line to follow. I'm just going to sew that right together like that. Okay, and take that out like that, and I'm going to take it over and press it. Okay. Which direction should I press it? You know, that's always the question. You know, should I press this way or that way? On a piece like this, it doesn't matter. And it doesn't matter because on this side, it's not having to work with any other seam. And if you're looking, you know, this block, you'll know that there's going to be framing strips out here. So it won't have to work with a seam on that side either. So it doesn't matter. In which case, I always press to the darker fabric. Now, these are actually pretty much the same. But it doesn't really matter. I'll press toward the brown just because I feel like it. I'm not using starch on this. I sure could, but because there's no bias involved, I don't feel like I really have to. And remember, whichever side you want that seam allowance to end up on, if you're pressing from the right side of the unit, you put the side you want that seam allowance to be on, you put that fabric to the top, like I did right there. Because then when you open it and that goes over, it's going on top of that seam allowance, like that. Okay, so the next step is to sew this to this, and I'll have that unit. So I'm going to show you one thing about that. When you put these guys together, you're going to come back, I'm going to come over to my machine, and I'm going to do that thing again where I'm really trying to align corners. Now, if you look closely at this corner, I want to show you something. You see when I trimmed that off, I didn't trim it off exactly. I kind of got just a little left over. Doesn't matter. When you align not with the cut edge, not with that little thing that I cut off, align with the actual corner where the stitching was, okay? So that's all you're going to do. And I'm going to just stitch across here. There we go. Like that. Okay, and I'm just going to sew that 1/4 inch seam. Now, it's really easy when you're sewing this for the alignment here to get off. So watch that. You don't really want to see that bottom piece of fabric. You just want it to just go like that. If it starts to show in the middle, you can put your finger underneath and pull that bottom part over a little bit if you need to. Make sure they line up. I'm going to use the awl to just keep that seam allowance down. And once I'm there, I'm going to come here and make sure that I've got these corners aligned, that I have that corner aligned with that corner, just like that. Okay. And I'm just going to finish up that seam, making sure that it goes right through the machine the way I want it to, instead of going crooked. And there we go, right on through. Okay. So that is one side unit done. And this, in this case, it's the one for the top. So I'm just going to press this guy open like that. And here's something to show you. I pressed it away from the flying goose, didn't I? Like that. Okay. One thing to think about when you're doing this, okay, I'm going to be sewing it to these two, right? Well, I press these guys the opposite direction. So if you look, that seam's going up, these seams are going down. So when I go to sew them together, it's going to be really easy because all I have to do is butt those seams up to each other, just kind of nest them together, and they will cooperate. So here we go. Put them back like that. Make sure I have them in the right orientation and the right order, which I do. Okay, so I'm just going to take a couple, and I'm feeling that. You can feel this. When you're working with something, you can feel when they're snugged up against each other. I'm going to take it back to the machine. Okay. A little thread guy. I have a new thread guy. Woohoo! Because I just cut one off. All right. There we go. It's funny, I was looking at these fabrics the other day. It's the Le Marais collection from Moda. And I just, you know, sometimes when you're sewing, fabrics just make you purr. These make me purr. Okay, so I've done that seam, and now I'm going to do the next one. Oops. There we go. Now, when I open that up like this, ta-da, I'm going to sew this guy over here. I don't need to press it open yet because I'm not sewing directly onto something I just sewed. So I can go ahead and put this one on and then press them both at the same time. So I'm starting by aligning the center, those seams. If they're nested properly, the rest of it will fall into place. So I'm going to start with that, make sure everything's aligned. Okay, there we go, right on in. I'm going to make sure that that seam allowance stays down. And do you see how they're not aligned right here yet? They will be. I'll just bring that over, hold that down. All right, and we'll just stitch the rest of it right on through. Okie doke, snip and snip. And we'll take it over here. And there you have it. You have that top row, which is identical to the bottom row. See that? They're just the same. Okay, so I'm going to just set this one aside because I've already pressed this one. Well, I'll show you why. Okay, this one, the center one, and this is what I recommend. That center one, I've got this pressed in. These seams are pressed in. So on the top and bottom rows, I'm going to want them pressed out, right? Okay. So I'll press this guy out, like that. Okay. Here we go. And you can press from the top too, from the front side like this, which I think sometimes, you know, I can press from the back to sort of get it started, but I always finish, if I can, from the front because that really makes sure it's open and you can get a good look. There, that looks fine. And now I'm going to show you about when you're actually assembling your block. You're going to have this unit here. This unit, it's pieced triangles like you've done over and over again. and you just put them sewn together like normal. You're going to nest those like that, and you're going to make sure that your seam allowance is aligned here, and you're going to sew it, and you'll have this unit, okay? And then, when I sew that unit, I press that open this way, not just open, but I actually pressed it flat, pressing down the center, which is kind of unusual for quilting, but you really can't. You could press all your seams open if you wanted to. The reason that people didn't press seams open, the reason it was pressed to one side is because back in the day, battings were often just layered cotton, you know, that you plucked from the plant and you took the seeds out and you just kind of patted it in place. And what happened was if they were open seams, if you would press open like that, you had batting traveling up through the seam. Well, that doesn't happen anymore because our battings have scrim, which is a material that just kind of holds them down. They're not going to do that crazy thing where they come up through here. So I press that one open, and these seams are in, and these seams are going out. So I'm going to now sew these together, and I'm going to show you here. This is some place where I pin things. I know I don't pin very often, but I sure pin here. And I'm also going to put my glasses on so I can really see what I'm doing. Again, I don't start pinning on the far end. I'm going to nest a couple of seams together like that, put them up to each other to feel them. And then I'm going to hold that like that, and I'm going to put in a pin on either side of that seam. Okay, like that. I'm at that stage where I need glasses up close, don't need them far away, and it's kind of an in-between thing. So I'll try without and see if that's better. Okay, so I've got that pinned where those seams are going to match. And then I'm just going to ease this guy out here to the corner, like that. And I'm going to pin like that. I don't need to worry about that because what I'm going to be doing here, I'm going to be sewing through that 1/4 inch. If I put a pin right there, if I try to make it too matched at this point, I find that I get it skewed. So I'm actually not pinning that intersection. Okay, now here I'm going to do this again where I can feel. You know, you pick it up and you feel it. There we go. Okay. Put in a couple of pins like that. Okay. And then, same thing, I'm just going to kind of move that to the corner, just sort of easing it in. Because by the time you get a bunch of seams in there, you know, things can get off 1/8 of an inch. And you don't have to trim. If you start trimming that extra 1/8 of an inch on the side, on the outside, well, if you have a block that has a lot of pieces, or if you have a quilt with a lot of little blocks, if you take 1/8 of an inch off each one, or even 1/16 of an inch off, when you have 8 blocks across, you're 1/2 an inch short on that row. Or maybe the you know, something that you cut to go below it is exactly the right size. So, okay, again, on this one down here, I didn't pin it because I want to be able to just sort of work with it myself, you know, when I'm sewing. All right, so back to the machine. Now here's something weird and different. I'm going to show you something strange. Okay, I pinned from this side, but I'm going to sew from the other side, like this. Okay, and the reason I'm sewing from this side is because I want to make sure that I sew right through that little intersection. You see that? That's the thing I didn't want to pin because I want to make sure it's in the right place. And sometimes when pinning things that have a lot of layers, it's just better for me to do it when I'm right there at the machine. When it's going under, I can make sure it's right. It's perfectly okay if you want to pin, but I'm more comfortable this way. And as I said, the weird thing is you see I put the pins in on the other side from where I'm starting. And that's because I wanted to see one thing from that side, but when I'm sewing, I want to see that little guy there. So I'm just going to take a couple stitches, there we go, and take that pin out. Okay, now here I am at that place I was talking about. You see, I'm just going to come up to there. So I'm just going to stitch a few more stitches. Okay, now I have a seam going here, and then I have that little guy there. And when I'm right here, if I put my nail right there, I can feel them. I can feel where that's supposed to be by pushing my nail up against. Or you can just take a good look, and I'm going to hold that like that. Okay. And again, I'm doing this to keep that seam allowance flat when I go under, and I'm going to stitch right through that little intersection. Okay, and now I'm coming up to this guy, so I'll get rid of that pin. And as I come a little further up, just making sure that's still nested the way I want it to be. There we go. There goes the pin. Okay, now this one is thicker. You can really feel this one because on this side you have the same thing. You see that? You're going to be wanting to go through that one and through that. So what I'm doing is I get closer like that. Just get a little bit closer. Now what you can do, I could put a pin through here and a pin through the other side if I wanted. But I find, for me, I'm better off if I feel it. So go ahead and get it to where you think it's just about right. Okay, where you can feel it. Now, if you want to, you can always use a basting stitch. You can go ahead and baste these points until you have them the way you think they're, just the way that you got it just where you want it. And then you can go back and use a full stitch, a regular stitch behind it. Okay, I'm going to get rid of that pin now. Okay, and if it's a little bit raised, right there, that white one is a little bit raised, you can just bring it flat like that. Okay, feeling with my fingers again, make sure I've got that nesting still happening. Okay, get that pin out. I'm going to take a few stitches. Now, you see how that's raised there? That's not a problem. It doesn't mean that this isn't going to look fine when it's done. It just means I need to give it a little tug now to get it nice and flat. Okay, and I'm going to go right. See that intersection? I'm going to sew not right on it, just a tiny bit outside that. Okay, and then I'll just finish off. Like that. And we'll open it up and see how we did. Okay, whoops. Get rid of my little thread tail guy. Okay, so when I come over here and look at this, like that, I can look and see how my points are. Okay, well those guys look fine, and that's fine, and that's fine. See how they all match? Yay! And these match too. Okay, so if I'm going to put this one on now, I'm going to do the same thing, make sure I get them on the right side. That would not be good. Although I've certainly done things like that. Okay, to sew this seam, I'm going to show you the other way. Okay, remember how last time I didn't pin all of them, and I pinned the side seams. Okay, well this time, I'm going to show you what if I pin the other ones. Okay, if you want to do that, then I don't usually because it takes longer, and I find for me, as I said, the feeling works better for me. But if you want to, you put a pin right there through that intersection, and then you're going to put that pin through the same place, through where those points match, like that. You see that? Okay, and then I'm going to hold that pin straight up and down. If you just rock that pin and put it in down here, you have just offset the seam you're trying to get just right. So I'm holding that like that while I smooth to either side. And then I'm going to put a pin on either side and take that one out. Okay, so still feeling, make sure that pin's right side up. No, not right side up. Upright. Okay, there we go, like that. And then this pin goes away. Okay, so down here, I can skip where these two go together because I can feel those nesting, and I could pin this one if you want to. If you're going to do that, you can just make sure that you've got these two aligned like that. Now see, that's not right. That's not aligned. I'm going to scoochy that over like that and then lay it open. And I'm going to pin on the downhill side. The reason, if I put a pin here, just as I'm coming onto that, it's going to be very hard to get over the, under the needle the way I want it to, and I don't want it to go boom. And I'll do the same thing here. Now, so you can actually feel this with your fingers. You really can. But I'm just going to take another look. See, that's why I could feel it, because it was so far off. So I'm just going to move that guy over like that. There we go. And I'm going to pin over here. Okay, like that. And then I'm just going to go ahead and sew the seam very similarly to the way I just did it, only I've got different areas pinned. You'll find what works for you. Some people pin the whole thing. I don't pin all the way along because I find pins can be a real problem. Because, I have sewn over many a pin. All right, here we go. So same thing, I'm just going to zip along here. Okay. And when I get close like that, I try to get into the seam allowance right there before I take that pin out. Like that. Okay, a few more stitches. Then with my fingers, I'm just going to feel to make sure that that's nested. Yes, it is. Okay, like that. And carry on right there. This is really thick right here. It's like a lump because you've got things front, back, and every which way. Get that pin out. This is where the awl is really helpful. I'm just going to try and hold that down so it'll go under the presser foot with as little trouble as possible right through the point. Okay, get that pin out. And I'll just keep going, keep it. This hand, your left hand, is really the one that's holding it here. That's the best way because your left hand can, what I'm doing with my left hand, I'm looking to see right here if I'm still on that 1/4 inch or if I'm farther out. See how that's getting out? I can just use my hand to bring it back, like that. Okay, same thing, just feeling that seam. All right, and just zip on through that one. Get up here, take that pin out, and hold it, because it just, there we go. And to the corner. Okay. I'm just going to hold that and stitch all the way through, making sure that this corner piece doesn't go one way or the other. Okay, let's see how we did. You'll find as you start sewing a lot that you'll have ways you like to do things. And there is no wrong way. If you're getting the results you want and you're comfortable with it, that's fine. Don't let anyone tell you you're doing it incorrectly. Okay, good, we're happy. Points are matching again, yay. Okay, so I'm going to give that a good pressing. And then what I would do, I'm going to add my framing. Remember those frames? Okay, so this block has both the blue print and this lovely blue floral as the two frames, like that. And it's the same thing as we did before. So the short pieces to the sides and put the longer pieces top and bottom. So I'm going to sew the frame on and I'll be right back to show you what it looks like all done. And there it is. I've put the frame on, my block is done. I just think it's beautiful. I love this blue, that French blue with the rust and the brown. I just think it's so pretty. And it's not hard. This is not a hard block. It takes a little bit of just patience and just a little time. But it's all done and it's beautiful and I'm so happy. And if you haven't got your kit yet, if you want to use these same fabrics, you're going to want to go to mccallsquilting.com/quiltalong and you can order the Parisian Grace kit there. And that does it. I'm all set. This one's done. Now what I want you to do is go ahead and make your 2C blocks. You're going to have that border on one, that frame, and this frame on the other. And I'll see you back here next time.